Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for September 1st, 2023. I'm Benji Fisher, and I will be on for part of the meeting. Also here are Ralph Kohler, who's sharing his screen and will start us off, Emma Harrell, and Thomas Howell. And I think that Aaron McHale said he'd be joining us for the first half, but I don't see him yet. But anyway, go ahead, Ralph.
Okie doke. We're taking a look today at issue number. It's hidden on the widget, underneath the widget. Issue number 3272325. Password suggestions are hidden from screen readers. It's a bit of an older issue already. In comment number 6, I did basically a comparison between the Drupal installer, the Drupal user profile, the WordPress installer, WordPress user profile, and Joomla, as well as Typo 3 and Craft CMS. In detail, it would be the best if we read through after the meeting, maybe. And Nilu Ball added the needs usability review in number 9. And I've summarized basically a few points worth to note in the context of Drupal, in part UX, in part accessibility related. And we could quickly go through that. First, if you take a look in the installer, DB, advanced options, host DB, that is okay, save, never for the site. Now, if you are in the installer, the first detail to note, it's a minor nitpick, but in site configuration, it might be a good choice instead of password to change the label to something like choose a password or select a password, because at the moment nothing is set yet and it might be confusing. Let's make it admin. And as you can see, as soon as I started, you see that password strength indicator. If you visit the site with a screen reader, the password strength is announced, but maybe the wording could be front-loaded. At the moment, it is password strength strong. Front-loaded would become strong password strength or something like that. That way, the screen reader is able to already scan, because the information of interest is the strength level and not the label of that level. If you type one character at a time, the password strength level is only announced the first time. For the preceding announcements, only the label is announced. I've tested only in VoiceOver. And there is
Can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
What's the markup for that? Is it like, is weak just in bold, or is password strength a label?
Second.
Because that probably has a bigger effect on how screen reader interprets it than it does on the visual appearance.
You have a div with aria live, polite, and aria atomic to true, and password strength, and then you have a span with weak as the password strength text.
So maybe if we change the markup to make password strength a label rather than just using presentation elements, that might go a long way to improving the screen reader experience.
Yeah. 1 second, I closed that, otherwise it's a bit confusing. That's one issue. 1 second, just to confirm that's the correct one. Yeah, exactly. The other detail that is problematic, if you have a small working memory and you type in the password, and you afterwards have to confirm that password, there's no way to actually hide or show the typed in password. And that way it can be pretty annoying if you don't have a password manager, for example, and you have to rely onto your working memory, and you have, for example, a typo, or if you have some sort of physical impairments, jittering, or I'm not pretty sure what's the correct term in English is, and you have troubles hitting the right key, for example, I have a typo in there, and then having enter the password twice and being unable to validate what you've typed in, it can become pretty annoying quickly. I post 1 second, if I find the chat, I post the link to the issue. It's issue number 2293803, replace confirm password field with show hide functionality. So basically that is already covered. And then basically the reason why I've created that issue over here is, with a screen reader, you have no way to notice the password strength recommendations. There's no live announcement stating that there are any in place, and there's also no way, if you just tap through the interface, that you run through those recommendations. So the odds are high that those could get pretty unnoticed in case someone isn't minding the recommended recommendations to have at least 12 characters, lowercase letters, uppercase letters, numbers, and punctuation. And there's also, I'm not sure the correct name, but password policy module where you're able to create bespoke password requirements, and those could be even more sophisticated. And that way it can become problematic. But I just go with admin at not minding the recommendations at the moment. Let's put Germany and my site mail save. And if we go to the edit profile, that is another issue that is already more or less covered in one of the linked or posted comments. It's just I've just added the update the user edit pages in the ideas queue from Benji. It's issue number 3251513. Because basically you have first the current password, then you have just password. In that regard, you could also name it actionable, more change the password, or new password, for example. And aside that, I make it admin again and admin1. And then again, the same things apply like in the installer with weak and the password recommendations being unnoticed by the user.
So what are the questions you want to discuss at this point? Like, you've presented a bunch of things that should be improved. What are the decisions that we have to make?
Well, at first, The issue was suggested by Nilu Bull. For me, from my point of view, either if everyone is agreeing with the points made, or if anyone noticed any other problematic parts that might be improved. Because basically the scope for this issue in here is just about the password suggestions. What we've talked about right now is a bit of a broader scope about the passwords and changing and or the passwords in general, basically, within the installer as well as the user profile in the entire experience.
I mean, I would start with addressing the issue at hand, and then I would determine if we needed to open any additional issues. I think it sounds like we do, but maybe they already exist. I was a bit confused. I agree with pretty much everything you said, not always necessarily the wording. And I liked Benji's suggestion about changing the markup in a way that changed it to a label, so that you could hear that. I also, when it comes down to those recommendations, I feel that that should be a label as well, because normally you put the recommendations, I shouldn't say normally. I seem to recall that recommendations usually come after the first place that you put the new password, that's not necessarily after the second, but I think that's not necessarily the best idea. So I feel like that's a topic unto itself, how we want to deal with that. If we can first confirm for the issue, the hidden versus show, I think then you can respond to this issue so that it can become actionable and move forward. And then if we need to do any extra stuff for the other points you've brought up, we could iterate through those points one by one.
Just one small addition in the context of this issue with password suggestions. I've missed that. I forgot in the document I've wrote up as my notes aside, the proposed resolution for the password suggestions is based on an article by Nicholas Steenhout, who recommends place the password hints before the password input field instead of after it, and associate the password hint with the input using the area described attribute. And I have to admit, I like the idea to prepend the list of password suggestions in a paragraph form with the visibility hidden CSS class before the visually visible password suggestions link. That way you have a condensed list of password hints for screen reader users.
So which of the issues do you want us to focus on evaluating first? Do you want us to just start here because you're looking at it?
I would, yeah, let's do that. And it's based on the following article in here. Oops.
So I guess the first question I'd have is, we know your opinion, Ralph, and I'm pretty much okay. Like, I agree these things are problems, everything you've mentioned, and I think we should talk through it. Is there anyone who doesn't think this is an issue? So Benji, Aaron, Emma, is there something that are there opinions that you need to express about this particular issue that we're looking at right now?
I agree it is an issue because, well, thinking about how a sighted person would need to have that information, it makes sense that it would need to, the password advice would need to come at the earliest point. I don't have a strong opinion on the resolution, but I agree the markup seemed a sensible suggestion.
Yeah, I'm also in favor.
Yeah, hi everyone. I joined late, but I support everything that's been said and recommended. The only piece of context I want to add is that, and this isn't specific to the passage suggestions, but just in terms of the broader issues, there is some of the new WCAG accessibility guidelines will I think at the moment it's going to be the most strict version, but in the future I believe it's going to be standard, where passwords are not considered sufficient because of some of the issues that Ralph highlighted around those with cognitive difficulties. You will have to provide an alternative way of logging in. That could be, putting an email address, putting the email address in, and it sends a code to that email. So I think we should do our best to make these things accessible, but also just bear in mind that in the future there may be additional methods that the user can use other than having to provide a password. But that's not really something I think, that's further down the line. I just wanted to make sure we had that in our minds as well.
So that's an interesting point for me because could we look back at the password like in the site example you did, the test site? One of the things, sorry, when you were building the site, oh, I guess you've already advanced past where the password was.
Yep.
But in either instance, both here and in the initial site during site install, I feel like one of the things that's challenging is the password, everything related to a password isn't self-contained. So if there were different methodologies or modalities for how you could authenticate to the site, you almost want to be able to delineate that and say this entire section is the password section. And then within the password section, then we're talking about recommendations come first. But maybe in the order of the current screen we're looking at for admin, it doesn't come before current password, but it would come before new password. So we would develop a pattern where a section about changing the password is called change password. And then you have recommendations, and then you have password and confirm password in that order, and making the changes so that both the recommendations and the password strength are accessible or more accessible than they currently are. But for me, it's just there is a section around password, but here the bits are spread out, and tabbing back and forth, you don't know when you're getting out of the section that's about changing the password.
Yeah, and just to add, I believe there are issues, if not, one should definitely be created about breaking out the user form into smaller forms. And as you said, one that is specifically about changing or setting the password, because the user edit form is not a good form. It does too many things in one form, and particularly we've looked at before, I think, around when you have to enter your current password. It's not clear which fields on the form you have to do that and which you don't have to do that. So I'm a big supporter of us breaking up that form into different stages.
So how to proceed?
Well, if we go back to the issue that we were just talking about, we know that the password suggestions being hidden from screen readers. To address that, we've stated that we need to move its position, and I think that was all in the recommendation. So I guess do we need to add anything in addition to the current recommended fix that's in place, the proposed resolution? Is there something that we've now talked about that isn't in the proposed resolution?
My point of view, I don't think there's anything additional added here. The points made are mainly about other places outside.
So then we should move this issue forward, and then we can reference other issues, or if we need to create a new
And create new,
yeah,
or small, and keep small scope and focused scopes, I think would be the
but the
best.
sooner we can move this forward, the sooner these changes get into place, and it doesn't feel like there's any dependency, like making this change can occur independent of the other changes, or am I wrong on that?
I think it could be completely independent to the other changes. That one, and the only detail is Aaron's comment in regards of future additional ways to authenticate, and the WCAG. That may be the only detail that should be noted, but still, until those are in place, or I don't think the traditional password login will be gone anytime soon in Drupal. So as long that is in place, I would consider it mandatory to move this issue forward. And yeah, one of the other ways to log in is the passphrases that was talked about a few months ago in the Drupal Slack, I think, from which is Apple and Google currently supporting and pushing forward.
And I interpret that to mean in the future, when those modalities would be used, it would be a drop-in replacement. You'd be using it in place of this.
Yeah.
So these changes should be able to proceed in the immediate future.
From my point of view, I would say yes. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like the text on this would be the UX group supports moving forward on this. We wanted to reference what Aaron brought up, the future changes, but it's just for the record. And that there are related issues that we would link to, including new ones, for narrowly scoped additional changes to support the improvements related to passwords.
Yep, just made a few notes. We'll add it to the comment, to the issue.
Awesome.
But just one question, would it make sense to change the state from active to needs work then afterwards? Because at the moment it's just idling as active and having the needs usability review, and if that could be removed and just set to needs work, to imply that people could work on implementing the proposed resolution or suggest different ones.
I think that makes sense. I would just make certain that I'd note why you're moving the state. They'd say usability team signs off on this, work needed to actually implement resolution.
Does it have any patches yet?
No.
Or okay. It
Not
might
at all.
be because the needs work and these review states are usually once there's been a solution done for it. So I don't know if we're still at discussion stage, as long as the issue summary is really clear on what needs done. I think keeping it as active is enough because there's not any current work on it.
Okay. Yeah, but just I've articulated the problem in the issue summary and added the proposed resolution based on the linked article. And I've added and Mark Weiler also confirmed he's certified JAWS tester. And I've also added a comparison with, I'm not sure if you were already in the meeting when I've touched that, added in comment number 6 a comparison with also videos comparing Joomla, WordPress, Drupal, Typo 3, and Craft, and how they handle the password experience. So basically, all the information is covered, and we also discussed that issue in one of the accessibility meetings as well. So. Then it will just comment on the issue and leave it as active. Okay.
It seems like it should be a pretty straightforward change. So.
Yep. And in regards of the other points, would it make sense to create one issue for the password labels, one for the installer, and one issue for the installer as well as on the user profile page, changing it from just password to something like an actionable label, meaning change password or choose password?
Well, I would probably change the label to, my opinion on this is new password and then confirm password. But I would have, again, like I'd arrange the entire section so everything was in a rational order. And then you could say, you'd give a label to the entire area of like, change your password or something along those lines. So it becomes clear this region is, or this form is changing the password, then within it, new password, confirm password.
Yeah, in the context of the user profile page, I agree. New password is totally fine. If you have if you have current password as the other label, then it's totally fine. But I thought on the installer page, it would make sense to choose a password so that there wasn't a password set at all. And choose password would make it clear that nothing is set yet, and the user setting up and installing the site has to come up with the one. That was the idea behind going with choose there.
Emma?
One thing I would say with choose makes it sound like there's a defined list to pick from, whereas create is maybe more descriptive of the action. I was also going to ask for consistency, how is this handled on other parts of Drupal? So if the same person is creating is create password used as a term, or is new password used as a term elsewhere? Because it's always good if you can use consistent language.
I think, though, based upon what Ralph's saying, is these are two different instances. New password is in comparison to current password, whereas on the initial form during installation, that's you could call it like create initial password, which would be very specific to that form, and it makes it clear that there is no pre-existing password.
Yeah. Yeah, I get this one has context of you entering a current one and then you're putting a new one in. I've used forms before where it will say create a password. I've also used forms where it just says new password, and then you understand for inference that you're making something new. But yeah, I'm not too familiar with other parts of Drupal and if this is handled differently. But if the same scenario exists where you have to create a password, do we say create or do we say select or yeah?
I think any other instance that I would know of would be for like add-on modules and things like that. Like
Mhm.
I can't think of like I think this is the er instance of password creation. Like aside from install, this is the place where you're going to. There might be on the administrative page where
Okay.
you can do user administration. I can't, but I don't think you set passwords on that page at all under people. Yeah.
No, I think these are the only cases, and the only time where it differs is like if you're editing your own user or a different user. But I think again we're talking about like the user edit form, so something like change password or new password would work in both cases, I think. But I think Ralph, did you ask in terms of the link as well how to? I was wondering. I think you'd asked, should these be one issue or separate ones? And I think I would keep the changing the password text as a single issue for like both the login form and on the user edit form. So I think they are linked in terms of how we describe those, just in terms of the wording. So it'd be good to keep those changes together.
Just here, for the context, was what you've just described, Aaron. Here, I just quickly created a test user, and
Yeah.
there you don't have the current password. You're just able to change the password.
Okay.
It's interesting as an administrator, you don't have to confirm the password that you enter.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is also is, for example, if you're an administrator, you're able to change the password for another administrator. And you don't get a notification about that at the moment.
Yeah, that could be like because we require if you're editing your own account, we require you to confirm your current password. But in theory, like if someone has access to that account, they could change another administrator's account. I think
Exactly.
that's probably more of a security issue that at least we've identified and might be worth following up on. But I don't know. I can't comment on how we would resolve that at the moment.
That is an administrator now. Test one. Test one. Works.
This feels like a box of worms or something. Like is a can of worms. This feels like opening a can of worms.
Yep.
That's UX for you.
I think Emma, you've got a can of worms on your desk every day, haven't you?
I live with those worms. So my entire life is cans of worms.
Yeah, I would let's not dive too far into that specific that rabbit hole. I think let's stick close to the issues we were looking at. Otherwise, we could be here another hour.
I think that after all of the proposed updates, both the future ones that you've talked about, Aaron, and the ones that Ralph has us currently addressing, once all of that work's done, then maybe start talking about broader security patterns for these forms. Because I think there's usability issues around those security issues, but it feels like they're too divergent and you don't want to be working on these things in parallel. They need to be worked in sequence.
Yeah, I would agree. I think if we go back to if it's choose password or create password, I would maybe go create, but I'm basing that on opinion, just because of familiarity with seeing create makes me feel like you have to come up with something.
Yeah,
Just
I
just
think
to sorry, just to know, I'm while we love hearing the background noise on Benji's train, it'd be nice if you would mind muting your mic, Benji, if you can hear us.
So it sounds like we have a path forward on this stuff, Ralph. Is that correct? Do you need anything else from us?
So basically, I'll comment with the text we agreed on that issue. Then I'll create a new issue about the label for the installer and the current and new. And
What about Benji's suggestion, the
Yeah.
one to make it more readable, or I guess more accessible?
the markup for the strength indicator
Correct.
also as a dedicated issue, and in that scope, the actual strengths could be front loaded for screen readers, meaning however you phrase it, that is open for debate, but just front load the actual strength. That would be my suggestion in that context.
That sounds very reasonable, and it's in line with our past several sessions, discussions we've had around front loading things for screen readers.
Yeah. And what was password strength is now? I think that's basically it, because the other things is basically the hide and show for the password, which is an actual existing issue. And
Was there anything we had to weigh in there? Or did they request usability review?
where is it? 1 second. Update user page, user suggestion. Needs accessibility review. That's the only required. At the moment, that issue is basically stalled and not really moving forward. I think I've tested the one from 4 months ago and it failed, as well as the other ones. So it was on the verge between 9.5 moving to 10.0 and 10.1. That things were a bit confusing, and yeah, before that it wasn't working either. So, but I will come back to that and post that it's not working currently. Yeah, but yeah, Stephen already posted that it doesn't work. Applying, so not much to be able to be doing there.
So is the issue stalled on the original patch creator, or is this something where we can because this sounds like a really good improvement. And I know that I've noticed with other systems when you can't make it visible, at least as a sighted user, that is a problem. So moving this forward is, in both regards, for both accessibility purposes and for sighted users, would be a boon.
At the moment, it's not possible to provide any feedback. And if it would be applicable again, then it would be possible to provide feedback, and then the comparisons done here could be taken into consideration and compare how things behave then with, for example, WordPress, Joomla, or Typo 3 and the others. So, but at the moment, it's not possible. So.
Maybe if someone picks up the newer issues that you've created, Ralph, we could point them at this issue to move it forward. So if we see activity against what we're proposing with the new issues, we can, because my concern is this in a state where people are going to think that the patch creator is still working the issue, but we're seeing 4 months of no activity. This feels like it should be relatively easy to action. So I'm confused as to why it's not moving forward and what we can do to unstick it.
It's an old issue, 9 years or even older, from 2014. Here it is. And I think Luis Niemann isn't working with Drupal anymore, the issue creator. But I could comment on the issue and mention first that we've talked about the issue in general and link to that issue with the examples that might be helpful as well.
And Benji says it never hurts, or texted, it never hurts to post an encouraging comment, especially if it's already tagged for usability review. And the question is, Lowry, is there something you'd like to bring up? Because we saw you just joined.
Nope, I just joined to see if there's anything where I can help. Sorry, I joined late. I had another meeting.
This issue that we're looking at right now, is there any way that we might be able to get people interested in helping to get the patch working? Can you roll to the top, Ralph? So it's the show hide functionality on passwords. And we all agree that this is something we'd like to see from a usability perspective, but it's been 4 months since a patch was there and all the pre-existing patches are failing.
Do we know what they are failing on? Like, have you tested manually if it works? Or is it just the automated tests that are failing, or is it also broken?
It's manually, I've manually tested, and Steven also manually tested, failed to apply.
Oh, it's
And
failed to
wait.
apply.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we should tag it with the needs reroll tag.
Okay.
That is actually something that quite a few people are keeping track of, because it's kind of a contributor task where we describe what are the steps to be taken to make the patch apply with a newer version of Drupal. So that could help, get some momentum on it. I did get the first step done of getting an up-to-date patch.
The only thing, a few months ago when I've tried the reroll from Kostya Shupenko, and it applied, but problem was the changes weren't visible or apparent. There was no way to hide or show the password, so the actual functionality was missing. But
I think that's worth documenting and say that you may, like, when you re-roll, you could start from what is the last known patch that was working by testing it manually? Maybe that's the 201.
Not sure. Back then 199, when I've tested, it was unable to apply. Then with 2103, I was able to apply, but nothing was visible. No functionality in place.
Yeah, maybe we can just point out the 201 then, say that might be. Maybe, can you take a look at what are the test failures on that 201 comment?
And Benji's written the patch in 2.10 applied for 9.5 but failed tests. As well as he added +1 for the suggestion of re-rolling.
So it looks like the unmask test was passing on this one, which I guess is being added by this issue, but it was just triggering deprecation warnings. So I think that's a fairly good place to point out as a potential starting point. Like, that seems like the most promising one.
Which was the unmask? Is the most promising one.
It was a 201. That we were looking at the test trailers for the 201. Like that seemed like it could be at least somewhat working.
Okay.
So we could say needs reroll, and then we can point out that 201 is maybe a good place to start from on that reroll.
Okay. Red and okay. But the 201 was against 9.4.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of work to rebase that on 10.1, but yeah, I don't. If you tested 203 and it didn't work, then it's maybe not a good place to.
Okay. 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 Okay, then I think that's it in the context of the password suggestions and everything entailed. Thomas, maybe if we have enough time.
Yeah, if you could, in the early chat, I did have a, oh, and Benji wanted us to move on, or I agree. We should move on because it's, we don't need to review patches here. So the link that I put in earlier.
That one?
Yes, local Drupalism. So I've tried reaching out to people I knew at Acquia, and I haven't really gotten anyone who showed any interest in addressing locating Drupalisms, because one of the concerns that I've had, it's an old one, is that for people who've been using Drupal, which happens to be most of the most active folks, we tend to not see the things that are Drupalisms. And it was when we discussed this in the card survey results, my concern had been that for some people who responded in certain ways, they might respond that way because they weren't interpreting Drupalisms in a way that was consistent with the way someone who knows Drupal would respond. And that would distort the findings of how we want the admin menu to be sorted. But I'm struggling to figure out what the best way is for me to solicit a list of Drupalisms. I started a spreadsheet that I can link to. I don't think it's in the, I don't think I have a comment there with a link to the spreadsheet yet, because I wanted to put some stuff in it. And I can share really quickly, like what it looks like, what I've created. Let me see if I can.
Shall I stop sharing and you share? Or
Yes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. And I don't know if this is the right format because I generally don't create these things to share. These were some that we had discussed in the meeting, things that we knew may or may not be. And I didn't really talk about like alternatives or other ways of thinking about things. So I don't know what information would help us to understand those. For instance, an example of an alternative is when I was working at Acquia, I found better traction when I talked about taxonomies as vocabularies. So that would have been an alternative. And I don't know if that is concept. I don't know if that's something that should be added to this type of thing to help, because I guess in a lot of ways, it's hard to tackle this topic because to identify something that is Drupal specific, we almost need a definition or a source of the definition or alternative terms to be able to conceptually grasp what we're discussing. So I'm just looking for opinions and guidance.
Benji wrote in the chat, I can try to come up with a little slide deck to start a discussion, and I would start with terms in the admin menu.
Okay. Yes. Let me see. Let's see.
And just one brief comment. One, you've already added view mode and display mode. I would also add form mode. And one other detail I've noticed, but was unable to write up yet, that I've noticed in the context of the H1 issue, which falls also under the Drupalisms. In the top level, the first top level menu items, you have the extend name, and extend is basically a verb, and all other top level items are nouns. That way it sticks out, and it makes it difficult if you have a sequence of list extend or extend list. It's hard to read compared to other nouns. That way it's stuck out. And extend is also something, yeah, it's basically about modules.
Got it. Let's see. Okay. I think we're at time. Yeah, so Benji, it would help to have like whatever you would suggest for starting the conversation. And I think starting with terms, and we could even just scope it to terms in the admin menu, to be honest. And we could change the title of this to scope it that way, because it may help to avoid scope creep. To reuse the word scope like 5 times. But since we're at time, I'm gonna be quiet about this. Just let me know, Benji, if I can help with that or give you feedback or anything like that.
Yeah, I'll try to come up with a little slide deck and then we can bring it to our local Drupal meetups and see if we can get a little feedback that way.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. And maybe if anyone's going to DrupalCon Europe, maybe doing a birds of the feather there would be awesome. But I don't know if any of us will be there. I know I'm not.
I'm going, and so is Aaron, so we could maybe help with that.
So that would be
I
really
just
cool.
volunteered Aaron without asking him, but I can check that with him.
Yeah. And I want to be able to help us close this out. But the only concern I have is I don't know how much urgency this issue needs to have to proceed with the admin menu exercises related to card sorting. So I think that this issue can be a more long-standing one. So maybe whatever we can drum up within the next 2 weeks, we can just turn that over and say, hey, these are some things, because maybe when doing card sorting, you can give a brief description of these terms, which might help people sort them. Or is that antithetical to the card sorting? And we just need to talk about, do we need to change terms? Like what intent should we be approaching the discussion? Something to think about for next week, not to discuss today. And I'm done. So I guess we should just wrap it up. Say, oh, Benji said, thanks all. So thanks everyone for helping. Thank you, Ralph, for all that awesome work with something that's really important. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Everyone. and have
Thanks
a nice
all.
weekend.
Bye.
Bye bye.